You're listening to Systemic Error Podcast. The failure was designed.
Army vet investigated for sending postcard to Florida officials, based on an article by Nick Hilden. Florida's idea of a threat is a postcard, a state police response to a sentence. Florida officials had a 77-year-old Army veteran investigated for mailing Chief Financial Officer Blaise Ingoglia a postcard that said only, "You lack values." That is not a public safety story. It is a power story. A state agency deployed detectives, interviews, and neighbor checks over protected political criticism that its own officers quickly recognized was not a threat. Who actually had power? The people with institutional power were not James O'Gara, a retiree with a postcard. They were the officials inside Ron DeSantis' administration, especially the Department of Financial Services chain that kicked off the inquiry. The initial email did not ask whether the message was a threat in any meaningful sense. It asked for a threat assessment. That bureaucratic phrase matters because it launders political hostility into the language of security. The investigation did not come from nowhere. It was authorized by people with badges, titles, and discretionary power over whose speech gets treated as suspicious. The message was not the problem. The postcard was plain dissent. The detectives who interviewed O'Gara said, repeatedly, that they did not think he had done anything wrong and did not see a threat. They said he had a right to voice his opinion. They even acknowledged the obvious. This was what happens when political disagreement gets treated like a police matter. That admission is the point. The state knew the difference between criticism and danger. It moved forward anyway. Misdirection by design. The weak frame here would be to treat this as a misunderstanding or an overcautious clerical error. It was neither. It was an exercise in intimidation that happened to be clumsy enough to leave the police saying the quiet part out loud. The state's real target was not the postcard. It was the precedent. Investigating an elderly veteran over a short insult tells everyone else what kinds of speech can trigger government attention. The message is not be safer. The message is we can make your dissent expensive. Cowardice with a badge. The most revealing detail is that the detectives were polite. Courtesy does not cure abuse. A courteous police visit is still a police visit when the justification is political irritation dressed up as threat management. They interviewed O'Gara, checked his background, and then even contacted neighbors. That is not prudence. It is institutional overreaction used as social pressure. And when the state cannot find a real threat, it manufactures the feeling of one. That is how bureaucracies discipline criticism without admitting that criticism is what they are punishing. The larger pattern. This is what authoritarian politics looks like at the administrative level. Not always mass arrests, not always theatrical cruelty, but small-scale state harassment aimed at teaching ordinary people to self-censor. The machinery does not need a convincing case. It only needs enough inertia to make a harmless postcard feel risky. Florida officials proved something they probably did not intend to prove. When power is thin-skinned enough, it turns a veteran's opinion into a case file. That is not a misunderstanding of democracy. It is what contempt for democracy looks like when it has office space, email, and a criminal division. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to AlterNet for today's article. With the automated voice of Lesak, thanks for listening.